Donc on est dans la table ronde numéro 3. Donc il parle comment...
Now we're going to be talking about the contribution of mediation and intermediate structures to structure local producers. We have Pauline RICARD, who's in charge of the agri-local platform. We've heard about her, and she works in particular with the city of Avignon and others. Then we have ALAMELDINE, who is the coordinator of the REGAL system. This is an organization for mediation in the Alpes-de-Haute-Provence. So it's a virtual platform. So then we have GRUNEWALD, who's the coordinator of the network Eat Organic in Valence, and he will talk to us about the platforms. And to conclude, we have Rosalia Filippini, who is an economist at the University of Milan. And she will be explaining to us how the local producers are structured in Italy. So, with no further delay, I will pass the floor to Pauline. So there are a number of you took some photos of the drawings that our artist did. These are copyrighted. You can use these photos privately, but if you want to use them in any other way, please do contact her for authorization. So, hello, Esther introduced me, so I won't go over that. So I'm in charge of a platform called Agri-Local 84, which has opened in the department of the Vaucluse 5 years ago. So I just wanted to explain who is part of this platform, who are the buyers, who are the suppliers, and what our role is. So in terms of suppliers, we have 184 suppliers registered on our platform, farmers who can be recognized on the platform with small tractors, local companies which are wholesalers, cheesemakers, artisans and non-classified companies, because they're not in our department. The suppliers, the platform is designed for farmers. So why did we allow other suppliers to register? Because public law does not allow us to single out farmers. Who are the buyers? There are 79 buyers referenced on our platform. 49% are middle schools. Then we have 30% are communes and 14% high schools. And ourselves, when we hold an event, we also buy on the Agri-Local platform. So what I forgot to clarify, because maybe I set up a bit fast, is that our platform is an intermediate for public tenders. So the person, the entity that is launching the call for tender, and then the local producers who respond. So which buyers are on the platform, but who really works the most on Agri-Local and purchases the largest volumes? So 60% of the purchases are made by communes, and in Avignon they work a lot with Agri-Local, and due to the number of meals they have to produce, they buy quite a lot. So just to explain regarding the attribution of public markets since 2014, 40% are won by farmers. So these are one-off orders, orders for a single product, and for products such as grapes, for which we have a large production in Vaucluse. Local companies represent 20%. So these are repetitive orders of small volumes of produce. So the communes put all of their needs through Agri-Local, So here, these are markets that are carried off by wholesalers because our farmers don't necessarily have all products available. For artisans and other suppliers, the artisans above all the butchers who put in bids for the public tenders, but we also have farmers who process their foodstuffs and make nougat, for example. In terms of the volumes, between 2017 and 2018, there was an increase of almost 40% of the volume sold, and therefore we can see there is an increase in supply and demand on the agri-local platform. Esther, you asked me why there is such an increase. Maybe no, let's talk about the products straight away. Okay, we'll look at the products. We'll talk about these straight away. So, 4 products can be ordered on agri-local. The key product, and I think this is the same thing for you, Albert, is the apples, because we produce a lot of apples in our region, and they're very inexpensive. So for mass catering, it's very easy to keep them, to store them. So that's really our key product. Then we have everything that mass catering might need. We have carrots, potatoes. So these are not productions that are easy to find locally, and these markets are very often won by wholesalers. For pears, however, it's different. It's the producers who tend to put in an offer because we produce a lot of pears in our region. On agri-local, 70% of the products are local. 50% come from the Vaucluse region and 16% from the PACA region. So you asked me, what does a local product mean for us? So for us, a local product is defined product by product, because some products we need to go and fetch very far afield because it's not produced locally, and others are just on our doorstep, and we just need to travel a few kilometers to get them. But basically for us, I don't know who gave a definition, but local for us means region and surrounding departments. So let me come back to the factors that explain the change in demand in agri-local. Yes, I would like you to develop a little bit more what your definition of local, because when you define a public tender, I think you put some definitions of it in a radius of X kilometers or something. Yes, I could explain this, but it's going to be a little bit tricky if I can't show you any visuals. In agri-local, when you publish a public tender, it's really like a physical market. So I'm very sorry for the people from abroad who are not aware of what a public tender is in France. It's very complicated, a lot of documents, a lot of laws involved, very difficult to read. Agri-local really facilitates the task and make it very easy to create a public tender. So when you launch a consultation, so I'm talking about a consultation, not an order, I'll give you a very concrete example. For example, I'm the commune of Avignon and I want to buy apples. So I launch a public tender on agri-local where I say I need 50 kilos of apples, and the software defines a radius. Well, I am the one who defines the boundary of this radius, and it will send all the public market to all of the producers within that radius who might be able to sell you apples. Well, you might say it's localism. We talked about that. Localism is forbidden. So why does the platform do this? I say no. This is like fishing. In fact, I facilitate the action for people who are nearby, but it doesn't mean they will necessarily answer, because the platform also allows other producers or other organizations to put in a bid. So you also talked about the factors that explain why the demand has gone up so much. Well, I talked to you about the Galim law to begin with, because that is the trendy subject so far. I don't think we can really measure the effects of this law to date, so it will have an effect. But first of all, there's the societal question, which is important. In recent years, the pupils' parents are asking for local organic produce. I think the politicians hear this, and therefore this has an impact on the orders that are put through. And so there is an increasing number of communes and schools that turn to us to help them to work on the question of local produce, organic and seasonal produce. So regarding the growth of AgriLocal, what happened is in 2016 we created a new order module. So far they were party-to-party orders. We launched a call for tender, the producers responded, and then that was it. When we wanted to have a new order, we needed to go through the whole process again. We've recently integrated a whole new type of order, which is on order form. So we commit to a contract. So it's the same thing. We're bringing people into competition. People put in a bid, and then you win a contract over the amount of time that we define, and that allows us first of all to sell more volumes, and then also to look ahead into the future. So some farmers were able to actually plant produce thanks to the fact they knew the order would be coming in. So we worked with the Chamber of Agriculture and we worked with the farmers, and every Monday a farmer went along and took 50 items of his produce, and all of that was thanks to AgriLocal. You also talked about the relationship between, for example, the local, how we could complete the demand for products locally. So AgriLocal is a platform, but it's also a national association which was created by the member organization. There are 37 member departments in France, so each department has its own AgriLocal. So for us, our department is 13. There is an AgriLocal, that's in Marseille, and then the Drôme also has an AgriLocal. So they are split up, meaning that suppliers from the Drôme or Marseille can put in bids on the AgriLocal for the Vaucluse. So we might imagine produce swapping. So that we do organize an event where we call Near Our Plates, where our local chefs cook with local produce in the schools, and we work with the Chamber of Agriculture, the Vaucluse, and the Bouches-du-Rhône department to work on additional products. Therefore, we brought in rice and Camargue, and we sold them apples and pears. So it's good complementary dealings. So we can maybe now go look at the slides from REGAL and then go on with Eric and see what is different between the different systems. Yes, good afternoon, everybody. So REGAL means a network of local food governance. So the objective of this process is to promote school catering of high quality that is based on local produce. So we'll come back to the notion of territory and local. To begin with, on the first slide, I would like to very quickly give you a bit of spatial and geographic background, because there are, of course, as many products as there are territories and specificities, especially geographically speaking. So this project began in the Alpes-de-Haute-Provence. This is a rural French department with very low population, 161,000 inhabitants. So when I heard The city of Marseille had 856,000 inhabitants. That allows us to relativize things. 160,000 inhabitants throughout the entire territory. It's a mountainous area, so in terms of logistics, this means that things are even more difficult. One point of the logistics, it means that any structure that we try to define, or when we try to structure the producers regarding the economic viability of these structures, they need to really go as far as Marseille, Avignon, Toulon, along the Mediterranean coast to sell their produce. So you can see that our department also is surrounded by all of the other departments of PACA, the Provence-Alpes-Côte d'Azur, and therefore in terms of agriculture, we're greatly diversified. We produce practically everything. But there are a few points to be noted here. We have a production basin for meat and dairy products. This is one of the basins because there's also PACA, and part of it is in the Plaine du Gros, where we produce vines and also bulls. But most of the production is in the Alpes-de-Haute-Provence and the Alps. So I reason in terms of production basin and not consumption basin. So therefore we must sell our produce beyond our department. So we've structured the bovine sector for meat, and it can only be profitable if the meat is sent down to Marseille, Toulon and Avignon. So the area of Haute-Provence, 160,000 inhabitants. That means about 20,000 school children who can eat their meals at school. Another characteristic is that we have fruit and vegetables. We have produce a lot of fruits. We talk about apples. We have apples in the mountains. We also have market gardening, except that, of course, we're faced with seasonal production with market gardening. We were talking about tomatoes earlier on. For us, the tomato season is from June to September, when the school canteens are all closed. So, whereas we have on our doorstep the Vaucluse, Bouches-du-Rhône departments that produce tomatoes and lettuces, etc., and their season is far longer. Therefore, of course, we don't hesitate to go and get market gardening produce from other departments. And so from March, April, we bring up products to our department from the other surrounding departments of the PACA region. So a few points to talk about the question of local. So you see, we reason in terms of production basin and consumption basin at the level of the region already. So a few figures to illustrate this. We basically have some 20 or so companies in the REGAL network that supplies a panel of products that is representative of our basin, and we supply this food to school canteens. Why is there such a low number of companies? We might be able to answer this at a later date, but what is interesting in terms of indicators, so first of all, the city of Marseille talked about economic development. Obviously, this is not a direct objective of school canteens to achieve economic development. The objective is to have high-quality nutrition based on local resources. But these are induced objectives. Of course, the public tender has an impact on the economic situation of an area. So school canteens, there are about 20 companies, I said. They can be farms, they can be co-ops, they can be wholesalers, or they can be processing companies, but we'll come back to that. So school catering for For the upstream partners, the producers, it represents between 5 and 35% of their turnover of these companies. Among the school canteens, we have a central kitchen in the department that produces 3,500 meals per day, and that supplies 9 middle schools within the department. I put the constraint of public markets. We're not going to come back to that because we've already talked about it this afternoon. Currently, the level of introduction of local produce, the figures here have increased. We're more between 20 and 25% currently. And when I talk about local products, this includes organic products. Then we have 4 middle schools in the department that directly manage their catering. That means that they are not supplied with meals by the central kitchen, but they have their own kitchen. These 4 middle schools are not supplied for logistic reasons because they're in mountainous areas. Therefore, they have their own in-house kitchen. There are 8 high schools in the department also that are REGAL partners. And in these high schools, with regard to the constraint mentioned this morning of public tenders, currently there are high schools that are still work directly with the producers, with a level of introduction of local produce which goes between 5 and 35% according to the high schools. We have about 20 high schools in the other departments of the PACA region. So these high schools use REGAL for their supplies, in particular for beef, pork, lamb and dairy produce. And in the department we also have a certain number of primary schools, amongst which that of Digne-les-Bains, and which have a delegation of public service and an operator, which is Scholarest. So these are just a few figures to set the scene. So the first point to explain what our network of local food governance is. To begin with, it was a project that was carried by 2 local authorities, by the region Sud, the PACA region, and the department of the Alpes-de-Haute-Provence. What is interesting here, because this morning we were talking about levels of governance, we have 2 local authorities that have decided to work together towards the objective that I mentioned, meaning school catering and the supply of these school catering. So very often in France we talk about the multi-layered levels of administration in France, but here we're lucky in this area to have 2 very large local authorities, the region which has maybe 118 lycées, high schools, and the department has 13 or 14 middle schools that it must manage. So that's the first point. So two directions for our work with regard to local produce. The first is with regard to the objective, that is to create the dynamics and to forge, to develop links. So to create the dynamics by identifying the supply, the food supply in the territory. Here we set off from a finding. The chefs in the kitchens and the school canteen managers are not familiar with the economy of their territory. They're used to working with wholesalers, professional wholesalers, OMAP, France, and of course I'm not questioning their competency because they contribute their skills. But every Wednesday they come along with their computer to take the order. They're not familiar with the economy of the territory. So to begin with, when I talked about the local produce, what we want to do is really to build upon the wealth that we have within our territory. Because in our territory, we already have a certain number of tools. So in terms of food stuffs, we can have family small holdings. We have co-ops. We have fruit and vegetable wholesalers. For lamb, this is a difficult sector, the meat sector, whereas we work with processors for that cut the meat, etc. So we really want to build upon the wealth that already exists within our territory, and we need to bring them together with the school canteens. And that's what Hugues Fortuna, who's in charge of the central kitchen in Avignon, said. He said that there needs to be a place where people can meet. And when these people meet, it must be in a very clear framework. There were a lot of different terms this morning. We heard territorial alliance, strategic alliance this morning. In the framework of REGAL, we talk about territorial partnership. My work in this area, and it goes beyond the PACA region, of course, my work is to identify the supply and to create links, bring two people together so that people can co-build solutions to supply produce. When I heard Mr. Fortuna this morning, or earlier this afternoon, I was quite in agreement with how he approaches things. So there are 4 pillars. The first is proximity. And I'm going to spend a bit more time here because all of the speakers have been asked about what local means for them. The first thing for us is that there is the proximity of people are close to each other. So the head cook can work with the producer, the processor that they work with, so that together they can find the different solutions to guarantee the supply of foodstuffs. So this proximity allows to organize things within a territory. And what is important here is the transparency in the discussions, transparency as to the origin of products, transparency regarding cropping and animal farming methods, transparency on something that's very important also is how you come to the price. And that is even more important when we're working on sectors with intermediates. So a producer who works directly with a chef, the distribution of the added value will not be a problem. But the more intermediates there are in the sector, the more careful we have to be around the transparency of how we come to a particular end price. And so it is thanks to the commitments that are taken by the suppliers and the school kitchens so that all of this works and is aligned with the charter that everybody's signed. So I'm going to give you some examples of this. I mentioned that in the fruit and vegetable sector, we had, in particular market gardening, there was a problem of seasonality. It so happens that within our area, there is a fruit and vegetable wholesaler, and that's their profession, that has delivery circuits that really go into all of the valleys in the Alps. And they have developed a range of local fruits and vegetables. And they are also able, because part of a regional network, so they're also able to bring us production from the Vaucluse and the Bouches-du-Rhône departments to our department. So we work with this operator that is present within our area, but within the framework of the 4 pillars: proximity, consultation, transparency, and commitment. I mentioned that our department produced a lot of beef. It was mentioned this morning by the city of Marseille, who talked about their 50 euros. Their 50 bulls. We produce, therefore, a lot of beef, but the animals are there, they're in the fields, they're on their 4 legs, but we had no tool to mediate between the animals on their 4 legs in the field and school canteens. Therefore, we worked within the territory with the Chamber of Agriculture of the Alpes-de-Haute-Provence to build a sector directly with the animal farmers. We have a group of 9 animal farmers. It would take too much time to explain the entire process of local development that we undertook. It took us 4 years, but currently the result is that these producers supply beef to all of the partners that I showed you in the Alpes-de-Haute-Provence and 20 high schools in the region. I'll give you an example. On the 10th of September, there was the first delivery of the school year for Bourguignon beef. So 10 animals were killed and 1.5 tons of Bourguignon meat were distributed to 20 or so high schools in the region. So there was a potential offer there, and thanks to the structuring of this sector, this was made operational, and this is what we achieved. Another example, dairy production. I'm giving you these examples to show you how we design the project and how we build on the wealth we have within our area. So with regard to dairy farming, with an approval at for dairy farming, that means that milk is produced on the farm, it's processed on the farm. That operator already sold their produce in the area, and they had a delivery circuit. So the partnership that we built with him was, and he didn't wait for the system to work with school canteens, but the system opened up new doors. So we quite simply worked with him on creating links with other schools, and now the producer delivers not only the Alpes-de-Haute-Provence, we were talking about logistics earlier on, his farm dairy produce are sent through all the departments of the region with a transport company. So the lorry comes to his farm, takes the products that were been ordered by the high schools in the region, and it is delivered. It would be good now that you've given a few examples of mediation. And maybe we can look at the example now that Eric has to offer of his network. To see another type of intermediate. Of course, you have a wonderful talk.
Hello, I am a coordinator of a network which is called Manger Bio, i.e. Eat Organic. We've existed since 2010, and around the country we bring together platforms of organic growers and processors. We're in France, all over the country of France. Let's take a look at the map. Yes, there it is. So we cover 75% of the country. And by the end of the year, we'll have 20 platforms scattered around the country. These are platforms that are all independent, created by producers and processors. They're all independent, local, working with organics. Our members have created 2 platforms on which the producers and the transformers, the processors account for 50% of the management. So, what we have extra to offer is that we mainly work with local offerings. As has been said, local for us is our region, our administrative region, and the areas immediately touching that region. We also extend our range thanks to partnerships which are very transparent with Biocop Restauration. So we work in short chains, long chains, based on shared values, which enable us to relocalize activities to our region from one year to the next. We will, for example, sell carrots on a region. It could be Biocop who sells them, because it's always via the platform, but these are products that come from Biocop. And then these volumes, which have been supplied nationally, will be spread out locally to trigger synergy between short and long chains. So with this type of system, we have at least 80% of our produce that is produced locally, and 20% comes from outside the local area. I'm saying these are the figures are ballpark figures because there are major partners with local producers and Biocoop, and they use these Biocoop platforms, although they are providing locally grown produce for their own region. So the aim for us is to be a provider of mass caterers and to be able to compete with bigger companies by inventing a business model that is based on different values. So we wanted to work on an offering that covers all fresh produce, fruit, veg, dairy, meat, but also groceries, and we use those a lot in mass catering, rice, pasta, etc. The idea is to have a complete palette of goods which is secured for the authorities. We can respond to calls for tenders, even very, very big ones, and we are sure that when we're working on a local chain, if there is something which is out of stock, or if the weather means that something is not available, then someone in a different region will be able to fill that gap. So it really is reassuring. And it's very reassuring for the local authorities. Another factor which is important is the fact that we can guarantee a long-term visibility for the producers. And for years and years, people have been talking about how complicated public procurement is. There are many tools which already exist, have been created. We think that public procurement is structuring, and it's good for production. It can help you have clear visibility. It may be complicated, but it is good for your structure. So once you've got your contract, then things just move forward. The problem is that every 2 years there might be a local election, and the team at the local authority may be different. And so you may have got your contract, you've put in place all of the volumes and the industry, and then 2 years later the mayor perhaps might change his or her target in terms of electors and scrap the first work done in the past and start working in another direction. So it all depends on long-term political commitment. What we also want to do is act both as an economic player, but also, more especially, as a player that develops the region. We want to be able to guarantee to local authorities that we are offering a service which is at the service of the region. Our businesses and the tools that we have created have been created by businesses that are not to generate profits, but it's for solidarity, and mostly these are cooperatives, etc. And any profits are managed. There's no personal profit that is generated. So we are not a company with a tax paradise or anything like that. Everything is through the platform and stays in our region. We have also committed to work with organic produce, and the organic label is the only label that guarantees any kind of protection for the environment. It's perhaps not the best protection, but at least there are specs that ensure that we have visibility and that the producers know what they have to do. So we've worked a lot with the platforms and with our development tools throughout the territory. So we carry out awareness campaigns, and we organize a lot of events. Jobs have been created locally, and we recruit people, locals, if you like. So it is a way of creating local jobs. Throughout our network, we have about 150 employees. The figures go up and down, but they tend to be going up at the moment. The producers are paid at a fair price because the producers determine what the price are. They are the boss. They decide what the price is. And the prices are agreed among the different producers. So the products are put in place and the prices are determined once the producers have decided what price they need to offset the costs of some who will have higher costs, others will have lower costs. So the platform plays a role there of a regulatory body to sort things out between those producers who have higher or lower production costs. And then we determine a rather homogeneous set of prices and products, whilst accommodating bigger and smaller growers. So yes, the fair price is important, and we can use a mass catering to help us with that, because it has been a big challenge in the past of getting fair remuneration for the growers. We may well have the best product in the world, it may be delicious, it may be great for society, for the environment, but if you don't have a lorry to deliver it, then it's not worth anything. So what we wanted to set in place, we wanted to professionalize the whole industry for the growers, for the platform employees, so that we could provide a service which is in accordance with all the norms. We have to respect the norms, although we're not going to put plastic film on everything. We have to make sure that we are compliant. And there are bigger producers, smaller producers, and we try to impact the profession, but we have to make sure we comply with certain criteria. We have high-performance services in terms of logistics to ensure that we can deliver without being detrimental to the environment, and we have to be able to rationalize all of our logistics, and we have to have an accessible offering. That ties in with the first square there, because an organic offering must be available to the largest number. We're not there for a niche market for your richer clientele. We want everyone to be able to have access to organic produce. It's a bit of a challenge, it's not easy to do, but we try to organize our logistics to make sure that we can get to smaller sites and bigger sites. And thanks to this optimization among the bigger sites, it means that we can go to the smaller sites as well. In terms of your offering, you said that your organic produce offering is very dynamic. Can you explain that? Yes. As I was explaining earlier on, it's a difference between the long chain and the short chain. We are a player of transition, so we know that we live in a world that has become very industrialized, particularly for mass catering, with a lot of mass production and prices that are dragged down to the ground. But our goal is rather ambitious, and that is to provide quality food, quality in terms of society and the environment, but it will take time. So the partnership with BioCop is working in that direction. We have set up different values that we want to showcase, the values that all of the players have to adhere to. And we are relocalizing our offering to make sure that the volumes on a national scale will be relocalized to the different territories. So it's a constant ping-pong game, if you like, to be able to relocalize our offering. We really have to work together. We need to trust one another. We have to form partnerships, and everything has to be totally transparent. And when you look closely at how a short chain is full of quality compared to a longer chain, the difference is that opacity or transparency. You can have a long chain which is quite fair in social terms, it's good for the environment too. Just like you can have something which is local, which is terrible for the environment. So that is all dependent on the transparency that the players are keen to embrace. As for intermediaries, we also work within cooperatives. There's quite a new phenomenon whereby the client can come and attend board meetings or general assemblies, and they are kept up to date with the economy of the platform. So this is a tool at the service of the territory. We're not there to just fill our pockets. The added value that we can bring to the product, i.e. all of the service that we can add to the product, all of those services are very, very legitimate. I'd just like to ask all three of you a question before Rosalia speaks. The surplus value which you contribute, you said that I would like to know how you fight against these big structures, or what kind of competition are you in? What kind of extra value can you bring? What more do you bring to the table? And the question is for all three of you. We've been talking about values here. You've all used that word, value. Before Rosalia draws us a picture of what's going on in Italy. Well, in simple terms, we are in frontal competition. Those are our competitors. We're in the same business sector. They produce the same goods, and we are up against them in the markets. We have always refused to work with them either for logistics or in any kind of partnership. We're not racist about this, but we just don't have the same DNA. And we've got businesses who contact us and say, we would like to enter into your network, the Manger Bio network, because you've got all kinds of exclusivities for local organics with restaurants and stuff. And these restaurants, when they've been contacted by certain, so that people identify us with organic goods in restaurants. And so we take a look at the statutes of the different producers, we check their governance, we make sure that there has to be transparency, and if that's not the case, then there's no way we shut the door. So I'm sure you've got the gist of it. We work with businesses that belong to their region. They're anchored in their region. I spoke earlier on about fruit and vegetable. This was a mid-scale company. We use local producers in other cases. We don't... It is just part of the profile of the people that we work with. Joint efforts with our growers demand transparency about prices. For example, when you work with a wholesaler, we can tell you the price that we pay for an apple, how much goes to the grower, it being guaranteed that the grower will be able to live thanks to that, and then we can say how much the wholesaler pays, and that wholesaler, as I mentioned earlier on, is the only one, logistically speaking, who is able to go deep into the valleys. What I forgot to say about the REGAL system is that by using these resources that we have on our territory, we are working on kilometers which have already been traveled. We don't add new kilometers because our territory, in certain zones anyway, these lorries are already going that way. So we use these lorries that are going there anyway, with thanks to those partnerships which I described earlier on. So it's not frontal competition here. This is a project for our region where all of the players get together to say together, and shored up by the local authorities, because the local authority is at the helm. So the local authority is at the helm and is in charge of governance for these partnerships. Well, I spoke briefly about this when I said that some consultations are won by wholesalers rather than growers. My stance is slightly different because we are a public service. We have a platform, a paperless platform. We are not there to make people get into competition with each other. However, we do note that local authorities cannot do without these wholesalers, or for some products anyway. So for us, it's important to define with the wholesalers, with the local authorities, what they're going to be able to buy directly, or what they'll have to choose from wholesalers. Some local authorities use AgriLocal to place all of their orders for all products, and so they are in contact with growers, but and sometimes the local authorities will only go onto AgriLocal to place those orders that they know will be met by farmers. So I don't really think it creates competition. However, some produce that is grown locally, well, we're not buying that anymore from the wholesalers. Before we go any further, I think it will be great for us, for Rosalia to give us the portrait of Italy so that we can compare it with what's going on in France. In Italy, how do you structure your offering? How do you get local grown produce into school canteens, for example? And how on earth will you be able to develop that sector? So, and for you, what is a local grower? Do you use the term local or do you use something else? Hello, everybody. Good evening. I hope my French is good enough for you, but I am tired. It's the end of the day. So Esther asked me if I could show you all that I discovered in Italy on the subject of local food sufficiency and the different problems that are linked to introducing an intermediary between the growers and all of the other players in the sector. So I'm a researcher at Milan University, and my work is not practical hands-on work like yours. However, I observe reality and I ask questions after I've observed reality. So then I observe, ask questions, re-observe, and re-ask more questions. And so I ask people to explain to me what on earth is going on out in the field. They explain it to me. I'm an economist, but my thesis is on agronomy. And I must say that my starting point was farming and farmers, not the food chain, because the research question was to understand the local food system and how it can be a means for maintaining farming in peri-urban regions. And so I studied either farmers who were not part and parcel of the local system to understand why, what were the advantages, the constraints, and I also analysed those farmers who are part of the local food system. So I would like to explain to you, or describe to you, 4 experiences of local food systems which I discovered during my thesis and also afterwards when I continued my research work. The thesis was called APIS. It was in Pisa. I studied in Pisa. Now I'm in Lombardy, still in Italy. Pisa is a medium-sized town. It's a very small town, really, if you're truthful about it, and it's got a lot of youngsters in it. Milan is a big metropolitan city with dynamic farming. There in Milan, you've got the agricultural park. It's really big and important. I think it was Europe's first agricultural park, so they really are cutting edge there. They're very proud about it in Milan. So for the first experience was a localized agri-food system, localized, not local. This is really important for the farming economy. These are systems of localized food systems, typical products in Italy and in France. The farming economy has its typical products, and it also has its labels. It's all very important. I come from Emilia-Romagna in Italy, and there we're famous for our Parma ham and our Parmesan cheeses. So it's really important to me to have that recognition for the local produce, and that is one definition of local. It is a product. It is a local product. It is a product where there is either a social definition, an identity, or there is a geographical identification, because Parma ham can only be produced in Parma. Parmesan milk has to come from cows that are in that region. The cows can't be anywhere else in Italy. There is a definition of what local is. It's very, very clear, right from production, but not for sourcing, however. That means that one can introduce into a school canteen a local product that comes from a different region, but it is local. It's local, but local to a different region. And having this type of products for school canteens is such a great thing. It's so rich. It means that we can have a local product, and you can also be having a product which has got a label because it's been inspected. It's sure, it's secure. And so it is possible to include these products in school menus, because you're not saying only that it's a local product, you're saying that it's a certified product. And that means that you can contribute to the local economy. However, we have also seen that this is true for very well-known products such as Parma ham. However, when there are new products, for example, if it's a private label, like beef from Pisa, for example, but it's a private label, it's not a public label, it's just a label which is created by a local association, then it's harder to get that included in a school menu or in a supermarket, because you need to have an intermediary player. So thank you to the intermediaries. You need an intermediary player who helps to get a contractual price between the supermarket and the farmer. It's great for the supermarkets to have these labels because they can offer a local produce. However, they need an intermediary player to deal with all of the growers or the farmers. But the problem of having an intermediary is that you have to pay that intermediary. So either the farmer is paid less, or the supermarkets add a bit of add a top up to the price. They sell the good at a higher price. So those are factors that are very important and decisive. The intermediary if the intermediary works for free, then the price in the supermarket is the same and the price paid to the farmer is the same. That's quite a unique situation, I think. I'm sure you are paid for your work as a mediator. Is that the case? So this is an open question. Does anyone want to chime in? The local authority keeps the region alive, and so it has a role to play. We've talked about sourcing and identification. The local authority's role is also, in terms of sourcing, to identify structures. That could be a platform, for example. Why not? It could be a wholesale market, a national wholesale market, because there are state-controlled national markets that have a role to play as well. So the local authority has to keep things bubbling and alive in the region and can identify, as I said earlier on, the managers of the kitchens can identify existing offerings, and then the business itself has to be profitable from the get-go. All partners in REGAL, in the 4 pillars that we have, ensure that a product only goes out if it's going to make a profit. So the local authority has played its role of bringing together different players in that area, and is also a driver in setting up the industry with the different organizations such as the Chamber of Agriculture. And I gave the example of beef. So let me take the example of beef again. We had a group of breeders. We put that together. It took some work. When these breeders met the chefs and the cooks, they started to understand one another. And we work industry by industry, because the logistics are quite different for each produce. You don't work with meat the same way as you work with your fruit and vegetable. The regulations aren't the same, the trays aren't the same, and there are players in each industry who have specific training, etc., and have specializations. So when the chefs met the breeders, well, let me give you an example.
So the farmers group at the end of the school year hands to all of the partner chefs their delivery schedule. The delivery schedule goes to the cooks, and the cook says, well, at this date I order so much steak, so much bourguignon meat, etc. So this gives visibility to the farmers for practically a whole school year, and it also allows them to prepare their animals consequently. Behind all of this there's a slaughterhouse, etc., etc. So this is coming together of the players who co-build their supply chain within this framework. So that's also the role of the local authorities, to organize the territory. So that is a private intermediate player, not public. That's an important difference. The second experience, the alternative food networks, I'm sure you're familiar with this. I use the French word short circuit, although the definition in France is very specific, but the idea is to better connect farmers with consumers. There are lots of benefits. And so what we hope to achieve is, thanks to these short circuits, this direct relationship will allow fairer prices, either for the farmer or the consumer. There is traceability, and In the study of the farmers, we've seen that there was a lot of hybridization. Somebody this morning asked that question. Hybridation, either of farmers or conventional or alternative food chains, meaning the farmers sold the same produce at the same time either to the conventional supply chain or the alternative supply chain, or they sell different produce, but they are involved in both. Or there is a hybridation between the alternative sectors, meaning that there is no specialization. The lady today said the contrary. But one farmer can either sell directly from the farm or on the producer's market, the farmer's market, or through the CSAs or other types of sales. That's good because it means that the farmers are very dynamic and they take a lot of initiatives. They're very but there might be fragmentation. When I questioned all of the salespeople who worked with farmers, a lot of people asked me, is this system really a resilient and economically sustainable system? Because if I have a shop and I have to work with these farmers who are giving me this now, but in next month I'm not sure what they can give me, what is the economic viability of this experience? Especially because there is no coordination or intermediary player. And above all, there is the problem of social exclusion. Meaning it's always the same farmers that are included in the alternative food network. It's difficult to have information on the other farmers that might be available. Does it mean that the other farmers who are not part of the network are not available, or maybe they're not? They don't have enough awareness to participate in the sector? The third is the food shed approach. You know what a food shed is. To be as simple as possible, a food shed is a method to study the production capacity of a territory in order to guarantee production for one factory or one school canteen within a food basin. Yeah. French, they use the term food basin, and that's what we call food shed in England. So in the case of school canteens, we know very well what the benefits are: traceability, questions of food safety, etc. I studied the experience of school canteens in a small town in the middle of the countryside in Lombardy. And there, the farming was highly specialized around dairy and meat production and melons. Because these are typical produce from Milan and Mantova. So it was very difficult to organize the sector with local farmers because the farmers said, well, yes, if you want, I can sell you my melons, but only over the summer months, up until September, and then afterwards it was difficult to identify any local production. So that brought around the question, what does local mean? And we didn't give an answer to that, but beyond that, there were also the problems. There was a problem of awareness raising among families and children and teachers to the fact that there was local production that could be brought into the school canteens. And farming produce, even if it was not local, didn't mean it was not quality production. So The question was raising awareness around food and nutrition among children's families' parents. In Italy, the school canteen sector, so of course there are the children that eat, the teachers eat and supervise the children whilst they're eating. There is the catering, and normally it's a very big company that looks after this, not only in that town but in other regions as well. And then there is the municipality that has to set down the rules in terms of menus, etc. It's very simple, I know. But because we're economists, we raised a lot of questions around the intermediaries, which was the catering company. Because on one side, if the catering company is a big company, they can have gains thanks to economies of scale, and they can obtain high quality food at a fair price. But as the company is large, they have to manage food chains that are at the national level. They have to manage large volumes. So they told us, for example, that in order to give apples to that school in Lombardy, they have to order the apples from another region in Italy. And that apple went through a whole long journey. And the parents don't know this. They just want a product that is certified, that is local, etc. So we need to raise awareness to all of this. And I will conclude upon this point. So this awareness raising was wonderful for me, because they said, the teachers said, well, actually, we must also look at how the children are eating, because if the children are eating in an environment which is not pleasant, then they don't eat. If they eat in an area that is not an area that helps them to understand what they're eating, taste what they're eating, and have a enjoyable social experience, then they won't eat. They would rather eat sandwiches outside. To conclude, because we're talking about intermediaries, there is the urban food system, and that is a public player that is acting as the intermediary and who tries to coordinate all of these experiences. But as my previous friend said before me, the problem is when, for example, a municipality, when the political party changes, all of these initiatives might go down the drain. So it's very difficult to work with politicians. I'm sorry I spoke very fast, but I hope that I was understandable. I was thinking of the audience, but it's true we forgot all about the interpreters. Well, thank you very much, everybody. I'm going to give the floor immediately to the room. I thought that it was interesting that you highlighted the fact that in Italy there are different forms of intermediary structures that allow the small producers to participate in the food chains. Who would like to ask a question? Thank you, Natasha Strozenika. I have a question for Eric. You were saying that in eating organics here now, you have small producers, big producers, long circuits, short circuits, and that you've grown. You have now between 150 and 200 employees. And you talked about everything regarding newcomers who come and knock on your door. How do you deal with the question of the elaboration of individual costs? How do you approach this question of prices? No doubt with increasingly varied profiles of producers. We're talking about conventionalization of the organic sector sometimes. That's the question you started to talk about, saying that they're very small producers with very big producers within the same structure. On that point, we don't have a standard answer. Each platform, according to the producers that it works with, sets things up differently. But for mass catering and considering the increasing volumes, we're starting to see a lot of things changing in the landscape. Players that position themselves differently, especially for organics, we will be moving from 3% to 20% organic produce in mass catering. That's the law. That's what we should be doing anyway. But we believe that we can achieve only 10% by 2022. So we're multiplying things by 10. No, that's what we're doing in the network. Every 3 years, we multiply the network by 2. So small producers, large producers, it depends on the type of production. And very often, the producers don't yet have that reflex or the approach to calculate their production costs. So it's difficult to work on costs. So we have to all of us have to be able to do this in order to make it truly comparable. Then there are different types of production. Sometimes it can be multiplied by 2. So we have different parameters. There isn't one single solution. For mass catering, even though we work with organic products, the sector is quite standardized, or they've become accustomed to standardizing things. So we try to avoid moving solely towards field crops. We try to plan things upstream in our references, in our certification system, so that we make room for small-scale farming produce. And we also banish ultra-intensive farming systems. But this is adjusted at the human level in commissions, producers' commissions. We realize that there are also certain farms that are not made to work with mass catering. So, for example, when we have farms that produce yogurts at 40 cents or 50 cents, and a whole other register, the non-organic industrial yogurts come out at 7 cents. Sort of industrial organic yogurts at 10 cents. So there are some guys, when they produce yogurts at 40 cents a yogurt, they're just not made to work with mass catering, or we offer them, but only occasionally. So the approach will be different. But if we want to be competitive in public tenders, we're economic players, and we're up against people who are very robust. So we have to be able to produce yogurts at 20 or 25 cents. And the idea is to get into the market and stay there, because we have farmers, producers who came in with yogurts at 35 cents. And the authorities said, yes, it's wonderful, they're really tasty. The guy invested, he set up his chain. 2 years later, they said, well, no, we're going to be working with the de Vache from Danone. And the guy almost committed suicide. So we're juggling all of this. Thank you for these very interesting presentations. I had two questions. The first was about the model of the intermediary player. We can see in the comparison between countries. What I wonder, I can see that it is of general interest, and that role can be played by the local authorities, but it's very difficult when I hear we are a platform for the interest of all and we don't bring people into competition, because there is a public platform, but then there are private players who answer the call for tenders, so people are in competition, so I don't see how you are not bringing people into competition. And above all, what is the complementary role of private organizations of the platform type or public organizations that are information platforms? Because there are two types of platforms that seem complementary. And the second question, with regard to what Rosalia said, is the notion of food shed, where I have the impression that it is more of an economic approach through the distributor that has delivery areas. Is that the case, or is it, if we come back to the ecological parable, is it a bit like a watershed, meaning it is something that has an economic and ecological logic? For example, say we're going to distribute in the same valley because it's easy to get over the mountain passes. So it's very difficult for me to understand this concept of food sheds as you described it here. So I will answer the first question. When I said that we were not in competition with wholesalers, what I meant was that the agri-local platform is a dematerialized public market. So of course the tender will bring people in competition. The wholesalers will be in competition with farmers, of course. What I want to say is that contrary to physical platforms, we're not there to privilege one supplier above another. We try to facilitate the administrative procedures for the users. But as also explained by my colleague from the Haute-Alpes, there is also territorial organization that takes place behind this. So I look after the buyer side of things, and I try to unravel their needs and to place them on the agri-local platform. And then there's the work of the Chamber of Agriculture that I've not necessarily underlined, but I would really like to pay homage to, because they work with the suppliers, the farmers, to study the prices, to see how much they can sell their production to mass catering. So there's a lot of support there behind the scenes. Could you please repeat the question? Est-ce que vous pouvez poser la question encore? Parce qu'en fait, oui, les concepts comment? It was the clarification of the concept of food shed as you are using it here. It's difficult for me to see the difference between a delivery process for an economic distribution player. For example, my delivery routes, is that what you mean? Or is it a notion, as we've seen in the literature, which is related to the catchment area, and therefore there's a certain ecological logic or circular economy logic behind it? Yes, actually the food shed concept is a concept which in the literature was developed parallel to the concept of watershed. The idea, but this was used some 100 years ago, almost. It was used in the context of cities where the research question was to understand the flow, food flow, meaning to understand what I'm eating and where it comes from, and what are all the steps that it goes through, the flows. And either at an economic level, because within the scope of the food shed you have to build the sector, but also ecologically speaking, because the question that arose and that the question that we're trying to answer is, okay, so either there is an environmental aspects to see if it's closer, it's more sustainable because there is fewer greenhouse gas emissions for the transport, or ecologicalization, because we choose produce which are produced within a space with specific farming practices. So this means that we will truly try to understand the ecological system behind the production, either within the space of production or the ecology of flows up until our plate. Is that clearer? In fact, there are both in the concept of food sheds. I hope I was clearer. Thank you. Thank you, everybody, for your presentation. I'm from a university in Belgium. I have a more or less open question to all of you on policies. Not only in the normative sense, because all of you, the gentleman from the network, etc., was talking about politicians when the political party changes, and there might be decisions to eat more organic food, or people in the local authorities try to get around the public tender constraints and try to privilege local producers. Then there are the European regulations in the broader sense, and that is quite rigid, and so it does not allow people to favor local producers, but it does favor competition, because that favors the consumer ultimately. And I hear that your arguments are more economic, so how can farmers reduce the cost? And then there are government services, or for organic food, how can we make sure that the costs remain reasonable to have a price that is competitive? So I wonder if a major part of the diagnosis as to why this type of farming and lifestyle, why do we not really address the political aspect of things, the policies? What from the private side, what would you ask from the French government or Europe? What would you want them to do to change so that this type of constraint is removed? Or for the government or the local authorities, how can we extend the political power of consumers by allowing them to decide what sort of food their child should be eating?
Well, it's true that my message is slightly out of sync with the others because I'm an economic player and also a political player. At least that's the way we experience it. In sense of politics, in the way you're using the word, it is not only the responsibility of the local authorities, it's also the citizens' responsibility. So it seems quite legitimate to me. We can't always palm our responsibilities off to someone else further up the scale. So what would we ask governments to do? What would we ask the local council to do? Be committed. I'm being general here in my terms. But today in politics, there's a lot of talk, very little commitment. Now, I'm trying to remain neutral here, but at one time or the other, there'll be for something and then for something else. There's the glyphosate, pesticides, all of this talk. They're talking and talking, but we have to stop with the talk. We have to take decisions. You can no longer say there are studies say that this, and there are surveys that say that. You just have to take a decision. What we would ask, what we are currently asking local authorities, is for them to be resolutely committed to the general good of the population, everybody in the long term. As far as public procurement is concerned, I don't know that there's much to be tweaked there. I trained as in law, and I know that these public procurement contracts are designed to avoid any slip-ups like that. They will always keep the general interest at heart. Sometimes objective selection criteria are a bit tight, but one learns to either live with them or skirt round them, and there are certain public contracts were put in place in Rome recently. The Italians are really strong at this. They know that it's not because something is illegal that it really is illegal. It's not forbidden. So you can actually do it. So in law, it's a kind of legal halo. That's the term that we use. And you can manage to do stuff. The interesting thing for the collectivity, what we want the collectivity, the local authority to do, the council to do, is to commit in the long term at the pace of farming. There are some local councils that commit for 1 year or two. It's rubbish. It's worth nothing. That means that after that, you're going to have to call into question all of these industries. They're trying to build up all of these sectors you're trying to build up. So commit in the long term with objectives and goals that are for the general good. So our back is already up against the wall in terms of the climate and other emergencies. Our back is against the wall. We really have to take some decisions now. I think in this type of project, political commitment is absolutely key to kick off any action. But it's not. Politicians aren't on their own. A project has to be operational out in the field. We have to have central cuisines, central kitchens, such as in Avignon, and people just like Hugh that we heard from earlier on, who's at the head of that kitchen. But in terms of politics, yes, we hear a lot of communication, but we're not moving forward, and we have to work on this. Political commitment is translated also into these public procurement contracts, and these contracts can be very structuring. Let me give you an example of the local authority that employed me. I am employed by the Alpes-de-Haute-Provence and the Sud region. The local council committed to developing local bovine meat, and so they went so far as to buy cows. We have a commitment over 4 years to buy these animals. We've got a central kitchen which cooks 3,500 meals a day. They buy cows, they have them killed in the slaughterhouse in Digne, and they serve them in the restaurants. That is a commitment which is very, very practical. And that political commitment has to be operational out in the field. You have to be operational in your kitchens. There are a lot of constraints. Earlier on, I was talking with a kitchen manager, and they were saying that the crews in the kitchen are working flat out the whole time. If you've got one person missing from the kitchen team, then you can have all the good political commitment you want. It's not going to happen out in the field. So we're going to have to get the political commitment and practicalities out in the field. I agree with you when you say that the local council has to work for the general good. There is money out there. There's an economic aspect also, and the citizen has to rise to this challenge also and be responsible. And as far as school kitchens, school canteens are concerned, well, depending on which school age you're talking about, then you depend on your city or your county, for example. For public procurement contracts, well, you have to take the time to fill them out, and very often these contract departments don't have the time. There are some action levers which can be actioned, which make it possible to ensure that we get local produce on the place. As far as the cost of raw materials and budgets, there's all kind of help that can be given to the kitchen managers. We've been talking about beef, and this is a political commitment in our département in France. We are saying less meat, but better meat. So we are focusing on quality breeding. Out in the mountains, the animals are out in the meadow for 6 months. They are fed by stuff grown by the farmers. They're totally autonomous, or autonomous to 90%, so it would be much better to have food on our plate which is of good quality, so that we can manage the cost of the raw material. We can give smaller portions, but this is all politics, and these are political choices that have to be made, and then you balance out with plant protein, for example, but that will require a whole ton of work, because once you've got the political will, then we're going to have to change our practices and train people to work with plant protein. Perhaps your chefs and cooks aren't trained, or perhaps they don't know the spelt that we use down here in the south. Some chefs and cooks don't know how to work with it. But it starts with political commitment. So, political commitment is important, and then we have to change our practices at every single level. At the level of production, farming has to be more respectful of the environment. But I don't want to put organics as a rival to non-organics. You can't reason in that way. The group of breeders that I work with work in the mountain. They're very, very close to organics. They work with we work with a bio breeder. With an organic breeder, sorry. We want to be transparent. We want to be careful about what we're doing, and it's all very political.